Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. Well, we are flipping beds. As you can see, my garden assistant back here, we're turning over beds where we took out the cool flowers. We took out Feverfew, Sweet William, they were all done. Orlaya was done. So now it's time, it's the first week of July, so now it's time to go ahead and plant another succession or a succession of warm season tender annuals. So today we are planting, whoops, losing my basket here. Let me see if I can hold the camera, hold my basket. I want to show you. We're planting some zinnia. We're planting royal purple and royal orange. And I usually plant royal orange and scarlet red for the autumn time, but I could not find the scarlet red, so I thought the orange and purple really would complement each other and be good for the autumn. So my gardening assistant is preparing the beds there. I've already prepared them with compost, cow manure, compost, aged cow manure, of course, and whoops, there goes my seeds. And what else? Leaf compost, so that it just charged up those beds a little bit. And we are also going to be planting some sunflowers today. We're going to be planting dwarf sunflowers, some sunspot, some pro-cut sunflowers, pro-cut orange, pro-cut lemon, pro-cut plum in the other bed. So she's going to space those. She's going to space the sunflowers about 4 inches apart, the seeds. She's going to plant those a ½ inch deep. And she's going to space the zinnia about 8 inches apart, the seed, and she's going to do a ¼ inch deep. So she's preparing her rows now and getting ready to plant these. Let me show you the sunspot sunflowers. Sorry about the camera maneuvering here. Trying to hold on to everything. So here's the sunspot sunflowers, and you can use those for cut flowers as well, but I just like to have them because they're a dwarf. They grow to about 36 inches tall. So they're a fun sunflower to have in the garden. And the turnaround time on both of these is about 60 to 75 days. So my first frost date is around October 23rd. So these will have plenty of time to give me some autumn blooms. You can really think about turning your beds over. If you're like me, I'm a cut flower grower and I'm not a flower farmer, so I don't have to depend on these for a living, but I don't like to leave my bed spaces empty either. It's really not good to leave your soil spaces empty. It's good to either have mulch of some sort over top of them, or just turning them over for another succession, another crop, whether it be vegetables or flowers. And I'll also be answering a question that one of our gardeners here asked me about cool flowers, and they asked me which ones were cut and come again, and what do I do with the cool flowers, what succession do I plant after my cool flowers. And as you can see, I always do sunflowers and zinnia as the next succession, so when I turn my beds over. So let's while she's getting ready to plant these seeds, after we plant these seeds, I am going to put burlap over top just to hold the moisture in, and I'll secure that down with some landscape staples or some bricks or something. So after we do that, I'll probably show you that step, and I'm trying to keep this video a little bit shorter, but I'm going to move up on the porch and we're going to talk briefly about and answer the question that I was asked, and talk briefly about just cool flowers. A couple things I thought about that you might be wondering about while I was transitioning and setting up the camera here. When I said that she's planting the sunflower seeds 4 inches apart, that causes your sunflowers to be smaller. And that's what I like for my cut flower bouquets. I do have something in mind for all of my sunflowers this year. I hope it works out for a donation. So that's why I like to plant the seeds that close. As a rule, you would probably plant your seeds at least 6 inches apart, maybe even 8 inches apart for your sunflowers if you want the bigger sunflowers, which are good for saving for the birds and everything like that, and leaving them in the garden for the birds. But because I'm using these as cut flowers, then we're planting those closer together. And the other thing I wanted to mention was to thank you. There's a lot of new subscribers, so thank you so much for joining us In case you don't know, my name is Bobby. I live and garden in a zone 6B/7 in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So getting to the gardener's question that one of you asked here on my channel about which cool flowers are cut and come again, and how I turn my beds over, what do I use? In case you're not familiar with the category of cool flowers is another entire growing season that you can get out of your garden spaces, especially, well, mainly if you're doing cut flowers. You don't even have to cut the cool flowers. You can just enjoy them in the garden, as I have sort of been doing this year in my garden, because I've just changed a lot of things in my garden spaces this year. But a lot of the cool flowers can take a couple of light frosts. You would start them and plant them out before your last frost date. My last frost date is usually around April 23rd. And because I'm in a zone 6B/7, then a lot of the cool flowers I can grow in the autumn time, and I can plant them out 6 to 8 weeks before my first frost date. They're little bitty seedlings. They survive through the winter. I do not cover them. I don't do this. There are some growers that do, but I do not cover them or protect them in any way. So they go through ice, snow, freezing temperatures, low teens, even sometimes close to, you know, in the Fahrenheit degrees, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever. And they survive. And then come spring, they bulk up and start putting on growth, and then they'll start blooming for you. So I'm going to mostly put the answer to this question in the description below of which cut flowers are cut and come again. But I will say a general overview of cool flowers. As far as when you're using them for cut flowers, of course you want to cut all cut flowers down low. You want to cut them very deeply so that you can have a little bit longer stems on if they're cut and come again. I have found with the cool flowers I have grown, and this is, I'm going to give you a caveat here, in my experience, as I'm not a flower farmer. I am a cut flower grower. I give my cut flowers away. I donate them. And as I said, a lot of times I leave them in the garden for the pollinators to enjoy, the early pollinators, and our family to enjoy. And then I'll have bouquets here and there if someone needs a bouquet. With all of the cut flowers that I have grown, okay, let's name off a quick few. Feverfew, Orlaya, Sweet William, Dara, Canterbury Bells, Yarrow, straw flowers, I'm trying to think, snapdragons, what else? Clarkia, Bachelor's button, poppies. I don't use those for cut flowers. I just use those for the pollinators. Anyway, that's a pretty good list of the cool flowers I have grown. And all of those are basically cut and come again. Now, I will say that the first cutting for me is always the best. It's always the tallest, especially for the flowers that I am able to plant out in the fall. Like the Sweet William, for instance, I can get at least a 2-foot stem on the Sweet Williams, on the fall planted Sweet William. And then the subsequent cuts after that are usually only not quite even a foot tall. So as a flower farmer, for someone who is selling flowers, I would think that that would maybe not be the best length for your cut flowers unless you're doing a smaller bouquet, like a mini bouquet or something like that. So what I'm saying is, with the cool flowers, I think your best course of action, if you want these, now if you're an established flower farmer, you already know these things. But if you're just learning this, or if you're like me, you're a cut flower grower and you're not necessarily selling your flowers, I think the best course of action is to succession plant. For instance, because I can plant out the Sweet William in the autumn time as little transplants, I start those from seed. Then I plant them out as little transplants. They just sit there, as I said, in the garden, just like this big over the winter. And then in the spring, they start doing their thing. But you can also plant a very early spring planting. So then I would start those again, like in February, so that I could plant them out mid-March or something like that, so that you would have the 2 successions, because you're going to get the blooms from your fall planted ones earlier than you would your spring planted ones. So does that make sense? I know a lot of people, a lot of growers plant, for instance, straw flowers, which are considered a cool flower, but they will go through the summer. A lot of growers will definitely plant successions of straw flowers because once you make that initial cut, like way down on your straw flower, we were harvesting straw flowers to dry. My garden assistant, who is my granddaughter, by the way, she works with me and for me. I think we got about 2.5-foot stems off of our straw flowers. You can get, you know, at least 3-foot stems or more maybe off your straw flowers. But a lot of growers will plant successions of straw flowers because once you make that initial cut, it takes a good long time to get your second flush of cuts on straw flowers. So what I'm saying is that, you know, you can do the succession planting. You can do, if you live, like for instance, Sweet William, I keep going back to that, but Sweet William I think is hardy to a zone 5. So those of you that live in that zone or higher, you can do fall plantings of your Sweet William, then do another early spring or late winter, early spring planting of the Sweet Williams so that you'll have them going on. I don't need that many Sweet Williams, so no longer do I do a very early spring planting. I have done that, but I stick with the fall planting. Another instance would be like the Orlaya. Once that is done, it starts setting seed pretty quickly, and then I just pull them out. I do let it go to seed because it self-seeds itself like everywhere in the pathways and wherever. My husband said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, that's Orlaya, and I'm going to leave that. Thank you. Please do not touch it." So once that's done, I pull it out, and you saw the beds there that we're planting, the warm season tender annuals, which are the zinnia and the sunflowers. So that's what I turn my beds over to always, zinnia and sunflowers. I'm sure there are other things, but they are one of the quickest to turn around as far as getting to your blooms. I also sow like some Saponaria. Saponaria is definitely a one and done. I heard somebody say that you could cut Saponaria down low and it would flush back, but I have not found that. Saponaria self-seeds itself for me. I had it growing over the winter, just randomly came up, and it was beautiful, and it's a very wispy flower, but once it's done, I let it go to seed and I let the seed pods dry out. I take the seeds out, I either sprinkle them or save them if I want to plant them later. And then I'll have another succession in the autumn time for Saponaria. I've got Saponaria growing now in my gardens. But the thing is with cool flowers that they're really going to lull once the temperatures hit consistently in the 90 degrees Fahrenheit, right in there that's what it does here for me in the Blue Ridge. That's what these temperatures go to at this time of year. So the cool flowers are really going to say, we're done, because they love the cooler temperatures. Let's take stock, for instance. Stock is a one and done. If you try to let the side shoots grow, they're like, you know, this tall. So I mean, you could use those for mini bouquets, but that's a one and done. Once stock is done, I pull it out and then I hit something else in there, and it's usually sunflowers. So stock is definitely something you can plant out way early. You can plant it out even in my area. You can plant it out like the 1st of March. Some people even plant it out even earlier. For my cool flowers, I don't try to get a second flush out of them, usually with the exception of snapdragons. Snapdragons, I usually grow group 4. There's 4 groups. I believe it's only 4 groups of snapdragons. And the different groups bloom at different times, and the different groups can go a little bit longer. The group 4, I grow rocket snapdragons, and they will, after the first flush of blooms, you cut them back, you cut them down low, and they will flush back because they can take the summer heat. So that would be one of the exceptions that I leave in, would be the group 4 snapdragons. So the bottom line of my method of growing cool flowers is that I don't try to get that second flush out unless I want to leave some for the pollinators, or I want to leave some to go to seed, which, like Nigella, I definitely leave that to go to seed. I have not found that to be cut and come again as far as putting out another flush, maybe a teeny little flush. But the main thing that I want with Nigella is to let those seed pods go to seed, because I just pop the seed pods open and I just sprinkle them around again and again and again and again. And Nigella just keeps coming back. Sometimes it'll come back for me in the autumn, and then sometimes it'll just sit there and just become little plants and come back in the very, very early spring. Well, it always comes back in the very, very early spring, but sometimes it will come back in the autumn. So, dear gardener that asked that question, I hope that answers your question. There's so much information that I could talk about, and there's so much information out there concerning cool flowers. It's a wonderful category of flowers. I do want to point you to a couple of resources. This is Cool Flowers by Lisa Mason Ziegler. This is like a super go-to book. I have it all marked up in the back. You can see here in the appendix that I have lots of things written beside what Lisa has. But the book that I really would say, if you can possibly afford to get it, I don't remember how much it was. I don't think it's terribly expensive. And I have some, but I must have been eating cookies while I was while I was reading this book. Anyway, this book, The Cut Flower Handbook by Lisa Mason Ziegler. This book, if you cannot get any other book, I would get this book. This is going to tell you absolutely everything you need to know, because she has warm season tender annuals in here. She has cool flowers in here. Let's give an example real quick, I think. All right, so I was looking up about Orlaya in this book. Orlaya Grandiflora is the botanical name. So you can see all the information that she has. I don't know if I was holding up to the camera. And then every year I need to refresh my memory, because it took me a long time to wrap my head around the concept of cool flowers, when to plant them, and I think I've got it pretty well down, but I needed to refresh my memory. Okay, do I cut my Orlaya back? Do I let it, what have I done in the past? And so she has that information. She says here the first flush of blooms will be the tallest, subsequent stems will be shorter as the season progresses, which is true about Orlaya. And then somewhere in here, I won't take time to find it, but she tells about what she does with it. So that was like, oh yeah, that's what I do with Orlaya. I let it go to seed. I scatter the seeds, because in the beds where my garden assistant is planting, I think it was the zinnia, it's full of Orlaya seed. That bed is full of Orlaya seed. So come autumn time, I'm going to have Orlaya plants just popping up everywhere in that bed. So that's really what I wanted it to do. So I don't try to like, oh man, I got to squeeze every single bloom out of this that I possibly can, because I just don't need to do that. And as I said, if you're a cut flower farmer and you sell your cut flowers, then you know how to do the succession planting so that you will have the longest amount of crops that you need to sell. All right, well, I feel like I need to show you the process of putting the burlap over top of these two beds, but I think I'm going to put that in another video because this is getting really long. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. If you would share my videos with your friends, that would be so helpful. And anytime you leave a comment, it just means the world to me. You give this video a thumbs up, that's super helpful as well. And until next time, friends, happy gardening. Bye-bye.